Hey everyone, how's it going? I'm Shahab and welcome back to our series on From Maps to AI Agents. In the previous videos, you'll learn how you can set up a Next.js app and also implement an AI chatbot using the Vercel AI SDK. In the previous video, we also added some tools to our LLM. This process of adding tools or giving LLM access to some tools, it's called tool calling. And it was very good, a very basic start, a small case study for what we are going to do next. But I thought that maybe we need to take a step back and learn more about the Vercel AI SDK, because that's the foundation of all the agentic workflows that we will be having in this video. We don't need to learn everything, definitely. We just need to learn some of the basic parts that we mostly use in our app when we implement the more advanced parts of our agentic workflows. So in this video, we're going to go through those important parts or basics, and then I'm going to show you how you can start from scratch again. Hopefully this will clarify some of the things that may not have been really clear in the previous videos. So let's see how this works. The Vercel AI SDK is an open source library that you can use for connecting to different large language model providers like XAI, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, and your custom ones. It's a wrapper around these APIs, which means that you don't need to use a separate API for each of the models that you can have in these providers. And it's an open source library, which means that you can also see their code base and then learn about how they have developed this very powerful library. But let's see how we can install this library in our Next.js app. So it's very simple. It's one of the nicest names for a library, or the most relevant one, which is AI. And I have already set up a fresh new Next.js app. And let's install it. npm install, or you can just say npm AI. So it's installed. And if I clear this, we also need to install the provider that we are going to use. So when you install this, you install the main structure or the foundation of the Vercel AI SDK. But now you also need to, if you want to, for example, use OpenAI's GPT models, you need to also install the library or the APIs for the OpenAI SDK. In this video, I'm going to go and install the Google provider because I'm going to use the Gemini models. For that, I use npm AI SDK and Google, the provider of Gemini. So now the Gemini model is installed, and now I can do npm run dev to run the development server. And then if I go to localhost 3000, I can see the Next.js app. Let's discuss what are the main things in the Vercel AI SDK. The Vercel AI SDK is actually composed of two parts. The first part is the core SDK, and the other one is the UI SDK. So what is the difference between these two? So if I go to the documentation, you can also see them in here. The AI SDK core is the actual core of the Vercel AI SDK. So everything that happens in the backend, it's actually inside this SDK. And there's also the AI SDK UI that I mentioned in here. And this is for cases where you want to build a chatbot and you want to make your chatbot interactive, just like how we have done with our app. And we have a chatbot where the user sends messages and then the LLM responds to those messages. So it's an interactive experience for the user. So the AI SDK UI is actually some methods that you can use in the front end or on the client side to interact with the LLM that works in the backend. So as simple as that. So in other words, we can say that this is actually the backend of our system. Okay. And this is the front end of our system. With the UI SDK, the foundation behind, or the backend of the UI SDK, is also the core SDK. So this is composed of two parts. First part is the client side, okay, which is coming from the UI, for example, some hooks and things like that that you can use in the front end. And also you have a backend part, server side, that actually it comes from this part. So why do we have two different SDKs? Sometimes people don't want to have any UI for their agentic workflows, and they just want to have some agents that work in the background, and then finally something happens. For example, something is stored in a database, and there is no interaction between the user and the AI agents in the backend in a way that, for example, we can see with our AI chatbot. And in those cases, the core SDK can be used. But in many cases, we're actually interested in having interactive communications with our LLMs. And that's why we need the UI SDK. So this means that if you want to use the UI SDK, we need a server side and a client side. So let's build them. Let's start with the server side. And for that, we need an API route. So to build an API route, I just go to the app folder. And if you remember, we just need to create a new route. First, we need to create the API folder, where all the APIs are located inside it. And then we need to create another folder that specifies route or what is the path to our API. So in this case, it's called chat. And then inside this folder, I need to create my route. And this name should be route always. Otherwise, it is not known as a route in Next.js. So let's build our backend system, or the server side part of our AI chatbot. And then we're going to move to the front end. So the front end is going to be changed. For example, this is the default text that comes from the Next.js fresh install. We're going to change that, and we're going to build a UI for our chatbot. But let's start with the backend. I'm going to import something called the method stream text. Okay, so it's this one. So what is the stream text? It's actually the method that takes care of streaming the messages that the AI sends to the user from the backend to the frontend. Okay, so it takes care of that part. The reason that it's called a stream, it means that it sends the messages from the LLM in chunks. So it feels like a natural streaming, which is nice for the user experience. We also need to import the provider. Import Google. So in this case, I use Google. You can use Azure. You can use OpenAI or any other provider that you may install. And for that, I'm going to use AI SDK Google. Okay. So these two are the main parts of our backend in our Vercel AI SDK for now, just for now. So now we need to, because it's a API route, we need to just create a function for handling the HTTP request. And the HTTP request in this case is just a post request. So I create a post request function, post, and it gets a request, and it's of type request. Okay. So this is actually the handler, the API handler that we have in our Next.js app. Okay, so now let's destructure the request that we receive to see what it means. What is that request? And the request, as you will see in the name, is a message, or messages that we receive, and then we make it convert it to a JSON. Okay, so the messages contains, you can think of the messages like a history of messages. For example, both the user messages and the previous assistant messages. Okay, so that's how it works. You will see what I mean when we go through it in more details. And now we need to create a method for our LLM. Okay, so we get these messages, and then we send them to this method, and then it will process them for us. For that, I define a result variable, and it equals a stream text. And then in this stream text, there are a lot of things that you can see in here, but for this tutorial, we need to first just select what model we are going to use. And my model is Google Gemini, and I'm gonna use Gemini 2.0 Flash. And then it also needs a system prompt, which is just a system prompt for the LLM. And I say that you are a helpful assistant, okay? Something like that. And you can actually extend it and add more details to it. It's up to you. And now we also need to send the messages that we receive from the front end to this model, to this method, sorry. Okay, so all the history messages, user messages, assistant messages, they go in here and they are processed in here. So you see that how simple it is. Okay, so without doing anything else, we just need one more line. We have set up the backend of our LLM. That's it. And that's why I say that the Vercel AI SDK is so simple. And you can easily do it for different providers. For example, OpenAI, XAI, and so on and so forth. So that's how beautiful it is. We need to now return this result from the backend to the front end. And then we're done. We're done. Let's see how we can do that. So we say return and result, and to, so there are different things that you can do in here. But for this tutorial, we're gonna send it as a data stream response. So what is that? A data stream response is actually, what it does is that it sends both the messages, okay, for example, the AI messages, and also, as you will see, when we add some tools to our LLM, it also will send the tool results. So that's why it's also data. Okay, so it's not a text. You can also send them as a text, but with this we'll send them as a JSON, as a structured data to the front end, and we can process them more easily. Okay, so now let's save it. Now I think that our backend is done. I don't see any other thing that we have to add in here. Hopefully there's nothing else that I missed. And now let's go to the front end and see what we should do in here. So let me make our life easier and get rid of everything in here and start from scratch. So in Next.js, when you have a front end, and this front end is going to be interactive, the user, for example, needs to click on a button, or maybe there's a text area where the user is supposed to write something and things like that. Any interactive part, that file should have a directive, a use client directive at the beginning. So use client, otherwise you will get an error. Now we are going to build the UI of our chatbot. So let's import use chat. And the use chat comes from the AI SDK React. So we are using a React app. Next.js is actually a React app. And the use chat is actually coming from the UI SDK. So whatever you saw in here in the backend, it was part of the core SDK. And now the way that we want to interact with our AI chatbot or build an AI chatbot in an interactive manner, those functions, those hooks, those methods for that come from the UI SDK in the Vercel AI SDK. Okay, so from here, everything we do is actually part of the UI SDK. And use chat is a hook, as you have learned in the previous videos. It's a hook that takes care of, handle the messages in the UI or in the client side. Now let's create the function or the component for this page. So this is the default component and it's our home. So for simplicity, I didn't create another page. We can just reuse the home page for this. And then we're gonna use the hook, use chat hook, and the use chat hook. So I will complete that. It's use chat. Let's say that we don't put any arguments in here for now. And then what it returns are a couple of states that we can handle: messages, input, handle, I think handle input change, and handle submit. So these are actually, if I hover on them, you can see their types. So this is of type UI message, and I will show you what it means, what it does, what it contains. But let's first implement that, and then we're gonna go through it. So we get the messages. The messages, it's actually, again, a state that changes as new user messages come, as the LLM messages come. All of them go to this message store, or they are stored in this array of UI messages. There's the input that handles the input the user sends, and then there is a handler which handles the input changes for the text area, for example, when the user types, what should happen, and things like that. And there's also another handler that takes care of the submission of the messages. Okay, so these are the states and handlers that we need for the UI. Next step is to just use them. So let's implement our chatbot UI and integrate what we have in here with the chatbot. So for that, we need to return the component, and then so we don't need to actually make it too complicated. So it's a very simple UI. So we define a div and mean edge screen. It's a flex call items, center should be fine for now. And what else do we need? Maybe I need to, let's also make it justify center. It doesn't even have grade 50 is fine. Maybe some padding, and I don't know, just something like that. We'll see how this goes. The next thing, so this is the main chatbot part, and now let's add another div, class name, and for that, again, let's go ahead with just some flexbox, and then let's say 2 or 3 XL. Just for the these are the things that I normally set for example, the chat to Geo or some other apps. So, and then border gray. What should we do? 300, and let's make it rounded XL, and let's make it nicer. Or no, BG white. I don't add any complicated things like shadows and things like that. We don't need it right now. So let's save it, and let's go to our local host. Okay, nice. So you see that we're here. Okay, we have done this part, and we're now ready to add more complex things, or the other components of our AI chat. And so what else do we need? We need, let's add another div. So we need another div that takes care of or shows the messages, user messages and the AI messages. So class name, again, flex, and I'm going to use flex 1 for that. So we need that to handle the sizing better. And overflow Y auto, yeah. And then I'm going to add some padding and let's make them 5 or 4. 5. I don't know. 5 should be fine. Okay, so what is the other things that we have to do? Or let me, before I make a mistake in here, let me close it. So now we have the container where it shows the messages. Okay, so for example, messages, to show you how this works. So this is the messages. It has a very awful color. Just we don't care about it right now, as you will see. But this is where the messages, the user and STM messages are shown. But now we need to, the messages are actually located in this messages array. Okay, we need to take it, and this is an array. So we have to loop through this array and then extract the user and assistant messages separately. And what I'm going to do is to define actually, or to create 2 different components, one for showing the user messages and one for showing the assistant messages. And that's what I'm going to do in here. So we can actually have them in separate files, but for simplicity, we just do it in here. So I define a component, let's call it user messages or user message. That should be fine. So it takes a message, which is of type string. You can actually have the interface defined in here. So let's define it in here. So I call it interface messages or messages props, or it should be actually uppercase, messages props, and then it accepts message of type string. Okay, so it's now better. So I say message props, and now I can reuse it also for the assistant message. So that's going to be simpler. So it returns, it's a component, it's a React component. So it returns, it should return a div, class name. For the user messages, I'm going to go blue. I like blue. Text white, hopefully visible. px4, which we used before. py3 should be fine. Rounded XL. Let's not make it too rounded. And then a max width of XC, extra small. And then let's break words to make sure that they don't overflow. So that's that should be good for this. And then message. Okay, so the message comes here. So I can actually copy the entire thing here and paste it in here, and then I just use it like this, AI messages. Okay, and we just need to change this to what color? BG gray, maybe gray 200. The text should be black. And I think that we're good. We don't need to change anything else in here. So now let's get the messages array. Let's read each of them. Let's just send the user message to this component to be shown and the assistant message to this one. For that, we just get the messages and look through them, and then we're gonna go through them like this. So first, do we need a div? Yeah, we need a div. And we need a class name. So because we have two different messages, maybe it would be better if I distinguish them in here. Okay, message.role, message.role user. If it's a user message, I want it to be shown on the right side. If it's a system message, I want it to be shown on the left side. Okay, so justify end, and otherwise I'm gonna justify it to a start. So this is actually, as you will see, it's not actually a good way of doing that. I will tell you why, but for now let's just use it this way, and then we're gonna see what would be the problem. And then now we need to show the messages. Okay, so if this is the user message, I'm gonna so I will tell you what does it mean, where it is coming from, but let me just complete this, and then we're gonna go through it very quickly. So we now use our user message component that we created in here. We get the user message because we know its role, it's a user message. And then we're gonna use it, and then we're gonna MSG content. Okay, is that good? Yeah, that's good. Let me see. We need to create this again before I forget. And if it's let me see, we need to also close this. Okay, and if it's a system message, so we don't need to just say add another statement in here. But again, that's not reliable, as you will see why. But let's continue, and we'll discuss it later. And now we can process or render the a system message. So msg.content. Okay, and we're done. Let me find where we should close it. We should close this in here. Yes, is that correct? Oops. Div. Yep, that's correct. Oh, before I forget, there is something which is really important, and that's assigning the key. So never ever forget that in React. It's very important for the DOM, document object model, to have a key for the different components that you are going to add, for example, within a loop, in this case, a map, for example. Because if you don't do that, the React component, the React doesn't know if something or which component has changed or which component is changing. So it messes up some things under the hood, and it causes bugs and things like that. So you need to always, in such cases, assign a unique ID for each of your components that you actually look through. So this is very important, and this is only for the parent component. As you can see in here, I don't do that for these child components. And in this case, the ID actually comes from the Vercel AI, or the messages coming from the Vercel AI SDK from the backend. But now that we have this in here, let's quickly review what we have and what we have done in here. So we went through the messages, and this is an array, okay? This is an array of messages. For now, an array of messages, nothing else. And each message in this array has some parts, okay? And you can think of it as an object. This object has different properties. One of them, as an example, is the ID. Okay, what is the ID of that message? So this is created by the backend, by the core SDK in Vercel AI SDK. And each message also has a role, okay? So this is interesting. I think it shows in here the role. No, it doesn't. But yeah, so we can see it in here. So a message role actually has 4 types. It has a system, user, assistant, and data. And for in here, we want to actually process user and assistant. So we do it for the user in here, and we say that if the message has been sent by the user, or if this is the message user sent, I want it to be displayed like this. I want it to be shown on the right side of the screen. Otherwise, I want it to be shown on the left side. But as I told you, this is not really accurate, because we have actually, if I go to the role, we actually have 4 types in here. But for this example, we assume that the other type except the user is just the assistant type. Okay, so, or the message is sent by the assistant. But this is not accurate, so keep that in mind. And again, we do the same thing. So now we just, in the parent, we say that which direct our to the left or to the right it should be shown, the message. And now we also need to render the message. If it's a user, we use the user message component that we created in here. If it's an AI message, we just use the AI message component. That's it. Now let's create the text area and a send button to our AI chatbot. So for that, I use a for. Okay, I use a for. Let me just implement the children. We also need a text area. We also have a button. Okay, so this is actually the rest of the AI chatbot UI. Okay, so now let's implement them separately. Form has onSubmit handler that we should set. So what should happen when the user sends a message? So that's it. And for that, we actually have a handler coming from the useChat hook, and that's this one. Okay, so I just copy it, paste it in here. That's it. Simple. Now let's make it more beautiful. So I P5 flex call, and let's make it let's do it a gap 3. Hopefully it's fine. So it's still nothing, but when we add the text area, things start to be shown. The text area, let's start with the class name to style it full P4, yes, and text black. So this is where the user sends or writes messages. So we have to create it like this. Border. So if I from here you can see it. This is the text area. Oh, it overflows, but that's fine. That's fine for what we are going to do. And then let's make it rounded as well, large. So yeah, it's better. And then resize, we don't need to resize. So focus, we can focus, we can not focus. I think that by default it doesn't focus. Oh yeah, it focuses. So we don't need to do anything. And what else do we need for that? Nothing. I think that we're set for it. Let's also set a placeholder type your message or message. Oh, 3. Okay, nice. So you see that we now have this. Let's also say to show you, we also, if you remember, in the hook, a handler also for the input change is also returned. So we can also set it in here. So what should happen as the user types in here? Okay, so this is also something that we should set. Handle, yes. What else? The input. We also have an input from the hook that is in here. Input. Okay. Oh, sorry. It should be value. Saying that. Why is it like that? Okay. So it shows the latest input that comes whenever that you type something in here. This is triggered, and then when it's triggered, it actually, this state is updated. Okay. So that's it. Let's go to the button. So it's of type submit, and let's also send. Class name BG Blue 500 again, rounded LG. Let's also add some hover style to it. Blue 600. So when we, oops, yeah, that's fine. Let's add some PX5 or PY2. Yeah, too much, but it's 3. Oh, sorry, this is 1. Okay. So now we have the AI chatbot UI set up, and we have the backend, and I think that we're good to test it. But we now, if we do that, actually we will get an error, and the error is because we haven't set the API key of the model that we are going to use. And for this, we are going to use the Google Generative API key. And then for that, you need to create in here an env.env, and because it's a local. So if I go to the Vercel AI SDK, and if I go under the Google, you see the Google provider in here. And if you want to see more details on how to set up each of these providers, you can go to their dedicated section. And then in here, clearly saying that you should, in your env, you should set the Google API key or the Gemini API key like this. Yeah, so I go in here, and then I paste in here, and Google Generative AI API key, and then I set my API key in here. I set my API key, and I now want to try our AI chatbot and see if it works. Hi. Oh, it's working. How are you today? Okay, so it's working, and you see that it's quite fast. Of course, Gemini 2.0 Flash is quite fast. Now it's working, but let's now dive into the basics. Okay, we want to see the messages and their types, and I'm gonna start with the backend. So console.log, and let's make it like messages. So as I told you, this is an array of our messages, both the AIs and the users. And then I want you to see the structure of these messages. So good. Let me send just something. And let me just make it bigger. So you see that this is an array, and then it has objects like this, or each element is an object. And each of these elements or objects has a role, content, and something called parts. So we'll learn about parts. And you see that this is the assistant message, and you see that the user message has actually one element in its parts element, but the assistant message has 2. So you will see why. Okay. And let's also go to the front end. I want to do the same thing in here. Console.log and messages. And then because it's actually a state, I think that it should process, yes, or render. So you see the different messages, and let me make it bigger. So now you can see things in more details. So the same content and some other things, and then the parts. So the parts have a text for the user's message, and the assistant message, as I told you, has two actually elements in the parts array. It has one that shows or says a step starts. I will tell you what it means. It also has one that is just like the user's message parts. It shows the text or the response. So you can also see in here, let me go to the details. So the parts actually has different types. So it could have a reasoning UI part, which means that you have seen that some models have reasoning capabilities and they think, so their thoughts are actually stored in this part, and you can have them and show them in the front end. So it increases or improves the user's experience. And then there is also a tool invocation UI part. We'll see what it means, but this is where the results and the status of the tool calling of the LLM is stored, okay? And then the source UI part, file UI part, and the step start UI part, these are the other parts. And the step start UI part is something that you've seen here, which is this one. And I will tell you later what it means when we add the tools to our LLM. Now that it seems that our chatbot is working, let's add some tools to it, or let's make it able to call tools. What do I mean by a tool? A tool is a function that the model can execute or run based on a user's request. For example, you can have a tool for temperature. Okay, what is the temperature? You can have a tool. Let me bring it in here. You can have a tool for measuring, for example, distances. Okay, length. Okay, length measurement. You can have a tool for area calculation. Okay, so these are, for example, tools. So these are some functions. And now the nice thing is that you can have an AI model that can have access to these tools. As an example, the user says that, hey, I want to know the temperature for my city, whatever, in Y. It's sent to the AI. The AI then infers from different things what the user wants, and then it takes a look at the tools that has been shared with it, and then if it infers that the tools that are available can actually be useful for the user's response, it will run the corresponding tool. And then what it does is that it goes to the toolbox. It says that, okay, this is the most relevant one. And then it selects that, it runs that, and then this function that was run, it returns something, okay? So the results go back to the AI, and then finally the AI returns the final results. It could be just a message confirming that, hey, I ran this tool, and then these are the results. So that's how this works. Okay, so this is the bigger picture of what's happening. Not really complex, but simply speaking, there are some functions. These functions can be seen by the AI if they are related to the user's request. The AI runs the corresponding one, and then it will get the results from the outputs returned by each of these functions, and then it will send it back to the user as the final result. So this is the whole process of, or the cycle of function calling in an LLM system. Now let's see how we can implement the tool calling process using the Vercel AI SDK in our app. For that, we need to import a new method called tool from the AI SDK, from the core SDK. And then this is where we need to define our function or tool. And our tool in this case, as I told you, is just getting the weather temperature, and then it returns it to the user. That's it. So simple. For that, I go to the stream text, and then we now have a new property. It's tools. And under tools, I can define different types of tools. So again, tools are nothing but just functions with parameters and something to return, and that's it. The first thing after, we need to define or actually set the name of the function. So let's call it fetch weather, and then I need to use the tool method in here that I imported, and then it has some properties to set or some parameters. The first thing is description. So what is the description? The description is something that the LLM uses to understand what tool is this for. So whenever that you ask a question, it needs to know if your question relates to one of the tools that it has access to, and then it will run it if needed. So defining or describing this tool is something that we need to do this. For example, this is a tool to fetch the latest weather data in, let's call it Ottawa. Okay, so the next property that we have to set is called parameters. So parameters are actually the arguments to this function. For this example, the argument to this function is the location of the area that we want to get its temperature. And maybe I have to change this and call it latest weather data for a given location in Ottawa, or maybe let's call it a street. So I want this tool to accept the street name in Ottawa, and then it gives me the temperature for that street. So something like that, very imaginary example, but you get the idea. And then I need to specify the street here, or this parameter that it goes to this function. So how can we actually define the argument to this function or the parameter? We need to use Zod to validate the parameters type that goes to this function. Why do we do that? Because models, the LLM, may not know what the type of the parameter to this function is, and then it creates a parameter that is perhaps of type number rather than just a string. So it needs to know what is the exact type of the parameter that goes to this function, and we need to validate that. And the way that we validate it is using Zod. It's a very powerful library to validate schemas. So we define a simple schema in here, object. Okay, so this is the list of all the parameters. We have the location, we have one parameter, and again we validate it, or not this one, we validate it like this. So it should be a string. And then we have again a description, okay, but not description, it should be describe. Okay, so I need to also import Zod, import Z from Zod. Okay, so let's describe it, and the description should be again informative. This is the street name in Ottawa. Okay, so let me tell you what happens so far. The user says that I want the weather temperature for this street in Ottawa. The model then sees that there is a relevant tool. So it goes there, and then it says that it sees that this tool or this function has a parameter in its parameters list, and that's the location. So based on the user's request, it understands that this is the street, so it takes out the street and it assigns the street to the location parameter that we have in here. And now the next thing is to actually implement this function. So this parameter goes into it, and then the function returns the temperature for this street the user specified. So simple. So let's implement the function. There is another property that we have to set, and that's execute. And execute is where the function actually is implemented. Actually, it doesn't need that. So let's implement the function. It's an async function, and it accepts the location that we set in here. So this is one parameter. It only has one parameter, and it returns, let's return an object. So temperature that we wanted to return, which let's define a random, an imaginary function, or temperature measurement, which is just a random number multiplied by 21. So a random number between 0 and 1. And then the location, which is location. That's it. So we define this function. This function takes in the location, in this case the street, and then it returns an object that contains the temperature that has been calculated and also the location for that temperature. That's it. And we don't need to do anything else in here. And I think that we're all set. Let me review everything. Yes. So far we have a tool. It's called, and it should be fetch like this, fetch weather. And then it has a description, what the this tool does. And then it has only one parameter, which is the location. What is this parameter? We describe it in here. And then we implement this tool or function in here. Okay. So let's see how we can actually use it in our app. We don't need to change our front end. Let's test it. Maybe I want to add console log log messages to get the messages. And let me open up the console. And let's ask the AI, I want the weather, temperature, in Bank Street in Ottawa. Okay, let me clear the console and then let's ask it. So you see that first it returns an empty response, and there is a reason for that. Let's go to the latest message that we got from the backend. So it has two parts actually. One is the users, or not two parts, actually two elements. One is the users message, which is this one. We don't need that. And the second one, we expect it to be the assistant message. And it is overall assistant, but its content is actually empty. And that's why it's shown empty here. But if I go to parts, you see that we have two messages. Again, we have the step start, and also we have a new type of parts, and that's tool invocation. So tool invocation is actually the type that is added when a tool is run or executed by the model. And you can see the argument that it set, the results that it received from running that function. And now it gives us this, but it doesn't actually return anything else after that. For example, I expect that it tells me, hey, I ran I fetched the temperature, and this is the temperature, but it doesn't do that. And the reason that it doesn't do that, as you've seen here, we have a parameter or a property named step, and it's 0. And we can also see it in here. And it actually, if I go to the stream text in the backend, there is a parameter called maxSteps. So maxSteps is the maximum number of sequential LLM calls when you use tool calls. What does it mean? So by default, it is 1. So in the front end, we also have the same thing. Okay. In the front end, you can also in here do the same thing. maxSteps 1. Okay. So it's also the case in here. But what it exactly means is that whenever that you send a message and a tool is called, if the max steps is 1, the LLM does not generate any more message after that tool call, because the maximum number of tool calling sequence is 1, and then there is nothing that should happen based on this parameter that we set in here. There is nothing else that should happen after it, so the model stops there. If I change it to, let me change it to 2, and for now I think that we don't need this. Let me do a refresh, and let me clear this out and say that need the weather temperature in Bank Street in Ottawa. So same question, and now you see that it replies after it ran the tool. Okay, so this is something that I expect. And if again I go to the messages, I go to use assistant messages, I have the tool invocation, I have the parts here this time that has more elements, and again you see that we have the previous tool invocation that we saw in the previous round, and now we have the part that has a text type, which is actually this one that we see in here. And if I go in here under the tool invocation, there's also a state of result. So a state shows the state of the running or tool calling. So when the state is resolved, it shows that the tool was run, and these are the results. So either successful or failure. This means that it's run, and then this is what it got. And if I go earlier, maybe here, yeah, you see that the state in here is call. So it is when the tool is called, but the result hasn't been generated or received yet. So you can see actually what's happening in here. And this structure is updated until the last tool call is invoked. So this is how it works under the hood. And you now see that how we can actually implement a tool calling process using the Vercel AI SDK. It's so simple. You can add more tools, but you have to make sure that whenever that your parameters have a more complex schema, you have to specify them carefully in here so the model doesn't generate something that is not correct. So this is a way that you can validate the parameters that are set by the model. Another thing is that make sure to set a good number for the max steps, because if it's too low or small, it means that if you have, for example, 5 tools and this is 2, the model may not be able to run more than 2 tools sequentially. So specify this based on the number of tools that you expect the model to run, and after that you expect it to return an answer or a message with content for you to see in the front end. So it was pretty much everything that you need to know about the Vercel AI SDK chatbot initialization and setup. We did different things in here. We just set up the backend, the front end. You learned about the structure of the messages in the core SDK. You also learned how you can use the UI SDK to implement the front end and then get the messages or communicate with the LLM through the backend. And now you also learned how you can connect your functions or tools with the tool method in the AI SDK, so the model has access to some tools to be able to run them and then generate some results based on it. So I hope that you enjoyed this video. In the next video, we'll continue the development, but in a video in the future, we'll go deeper into the AI SDK to learn more advanced things about it. And stay tuned, make sure to subscribe. Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.